Welcome to the part 2. Let's get straight into it. This is titled Robo-Planning. NDIS assessments would save government $700 million. Exclusive secret government documents contradict coalition's claim that controversial policy is not a cost-cutting measure. And this is from the 24th of April 2021. The introduction of independent assessments to the National Disability Insurance Scheme would save the federal budget $700 million and lead to smaller funding packages on average, according to secret government documents that contradict coalition's claims the policy is not a cost-cutting measure. Under proposed changes to the eligibility assessment process, participants would undergo a 3-hour interview with a government-contracted allied health professional instead of submitting reports from their own treating specialists. Asked in March whether the policy was aimed at finding efficiencies within the $22 billion scheme, the former Minister Stuart Roberts insisted this is not a cost-cutting measure at all. But confidential documents seen by Guardian Australia reveal that the National Disability Insurance Agency last year estimated using independent functional assessments for planning and access decisions would reduce the forward estimates by $0.7 billion. That's $700 million over 4 years. The document confirms for the first time that the agency expects that using the assessments to determine the budget for participants' plans will lead to, on average, a reduction in the funds allocated for people support. It is likely to intensify calls from Labor, the Greens, and the disability community for the government to scrap the proposal, which has sparked outrage in recent weeks and prompted the new Minister Linda Reynolds to delay the rollout. The estimate was offered in the context of internal concern about significant sustainability pressures, including a projected budget blowout. Independent assessments formed part of a suite of cost-cutting measures considered by the government's minister last year, the document reveals. Robert announced the assessment policy in August 2020. It means new applicants will need to undergo an interview with an allied health professional before being granted access to the scheme, while the existing 430,000 participants would also undergo an assessment. Reynolds declined to answer specific questions posed by The Guardian about the content of the documents, including the policy's impact on the budget and funding packages. In a statement, she said, independent assessments are all about ensuring fairer and more equitable access and planning for the Australians the insurance scheme was designed to help. The minister reiterated she was in consulting with NDIS providers and participants around the country about independent assessment. I won't be finalising the implementation of independent assessments until after the trial is complete, and I have met again with state and territory ministers in July, she said. An NDIA spokesperson referred questions to Reynolds' office. Last week, Reynolds said she would pause the rollout of the assessments, which was due to begin in the middle of the year, but there is no suggestion it will not go ahead once that is completed. At a parliamentary hearing on Friday, Bruce Bohardy, and the inaugural chairman of the NDIA and an original architect of the scheme, blasted the policy as robo-planning. Robo-planning will blow up the NDIS, Bohardy said, adding the real driver for all this is cost-cutting. The fact that robo-planning has reached the current stage of implementation is a disgrace, he said. It should have been stopped long before now. Publicly, the agency argued the free assessment will make the scheme fairer by reducing inequality and improving the consistency of funding package decisions. Independent assessments are not an attempt to remove support for people with permanent and significant disabilities or prevent them from accessing the NDIS, the agency said in a submission to the parliamentary inquiry. Rather, the rollout of the independent assessment is intended to ensure that the people of the NDIS was intended to support are supported to become participants and go on to receive a personalised plan budget which they can use flexibly with more choice and control. However, the agency has previously linked the assessments to the scheme's sustainability, a euphemism for budget pressures, including in its last annual report. It is understood the issue of costing for the policies was raised by state and territory ministers at a Disability Reform Council meeting chaired by Reynolds last week. The agency has already signed contracts with 8 companies worth $339 million to carry out the assessments. It has been roiled by leaks in recent weeks as it has faced internal and public opposition to the new assessment policies and a wider overhaul of the NDIS Act that determines who can access the scheme and what supports they can receive. An internal NDIA memo published in full by Guardian Australia this month outlined creation of a Sustainability Action Task Force, which was quickly dubbed a secret razor gang by critics. Separate leaked documents revealed the agency hired an external research company to help create a narrative to craft its promotion of controversial policy changes, including the introduction of independent assessments. The focus group research found staff were struggling and were concerned they cannot adequately support participants through the changes. It also found the agency needed to be more transparent about the scheme's sustainability, even if the outcome is not like transparency is important. Alright, and all I have to say about this, the only thing I want to bring up is how they're gonna save $700 million supposedly, but these fucking cunts have already signed $339 million in contracts with 8 companies so they can do these fucking independent assessment. Are you fucking serious? Oh my fucking god. Alright, let's just move on to the next one before I break something. Linda Reynolds says coalition will keep some form of independent NDIS assessments. Minister tells Senator pause of rollout is to get the construction right and future shape of assessments is the subject of consultation. And this is from the 3rd of May 2021. Linda Reynolds has confirmed the government will proceed with some form of independent assessments for the National Disability Insurance Scheme after announcing a pause that raised advocates' hopes the policy could be scrapped. Fronting a Senate estimates hearing on Monday, Reynolds, the new NDIS minister, and the NDIS agency's chief executive, Martin Hoffman, were also grilled about a so-called razor gang aimed at slowing spending on packages and participant numbers. Reynolds gave a lengthy speech that sounded the alarm about the financial sustainability of the scheme, likely placing her on a collision course with many disability advocates early into her tenure as minister. Asked about her pause to the rollout of the compulsory independent assessments which were due to begin in July, Reynolds said there would be a pause for several months to get the construction right. I have been very, very clear today and previously that in some form we must have functional independent assessments. What form they take is very much the subject of consultation. Disability advocates who fear the policy is aimed at cutting funding, packages, sizes, and participant numbers have believed the pause could pave the way for the policy to be scrapped. The Green Senator Jordan Steele-John questioned how the minister's consultation could be authentic if there was no possibility the government would scrap the policy. Minister, the entire disability community is united in opposition to the implementation of independent assessments, he said. Under the proposed changes, the eligibility assessment process, participants would undergo an interview with a government-contracted allied health professional instead of submitting reports from their own treating specialist. Guardian Australia reported last month that secret government documents from last year showed it expected the introduction of independent assessments could save the budget $700 million and lead to smaller funding packages on average. But officials denied knowledge of that figure on Monday, and Reynolds said it was not a number that had appeared in her briefing so far as the minister. The documents from last year seen by the Guardian state clearly that the introduction of independent functional assessments for the planning and access decisions would reduce forward estimates by $0.7 billion. Hoffman was also grilled about the creation of the secretive Sustainability Action Task Force, which aims to slow spending on participants and funding, and was revealed in a leaked document last month. He said its creation was part of the business-as-usual activities of the agency. The focus would be on clarification of reasonable and necessary, a reference to the legal standards that determines whether a person can receive NDIS funding for a particular support. In response to questions from the Labor Senator Nita Green, Hoffman would not say whether the agency planned to tell the public about the task force, but said he believed the participants understood the scheme needed to be sustainable. In her first public comment as the minister, Reynolds made clear she believed the scheme was growing at an unsustainable rate. It is a fact that today the cost of the NDIS are increasing far more significantly year on year than was expected, she said. Participants' packages are growing by 12.5% per annum, which was unsustainable over the long term. Reynolds also said spending on participant supports was expected to hit $25 billion by 2021-22, more than estimated $22 billion. This was despite forecasts that an extra 80,000 people were still expected to join the scheme. In comments likely to rile some advocates, Reynolds pointed to data showing that since 2017 there had been a significant drop in people classified in the scheme as high functioning and a significant increase in those who were low functioning. If you think about the implications of that, it's quite alarming, Reynolds said. The NDIS is actually making people less functional over time. So those are one of the many questions we need to have a look at to work out what is happening and how it becomes sustainable. Reynolds' decision to be more upfront about the government's financial sustainability concerns comes as the agency also pursues major changes to the NDIS Act that are expected to place boundaries on the supports that can be funded by the scheme. Reynolds said she believed no two people had the same definition of what reasonable and necessary actually is, and I believe this is something we now address. The agency recently asked an external research company to conduct market research that found the agency should be more transparent about scheme sustainability, even if it was unpopular. Reynolds and Hoffman also faced questions about the death of Liam Dunner, 23, who reportedly died alone in February in his bed after a seizure. He had been denied a seizure mat by the agency, the Australian reported last month. Reynolds and Hoffman told the hearing the agency had offered its condolences to the family, but said there was no evidence there was a causal link between the denial of the seizure mat and Dunner's death. I cannot imagine the grief that they are going through, Reynolds said, adding that she would be happy to meet Dunner's parents. Labor's NDIS spokesman Bill Shorten said in a statement after the hearing, the Dunner's family's tragic experience is another example of the bureaucratic nightmare the Liberals have created to stop people accessing the NDIS. Alright, first of all, we need to address how they just said there's no link between their denial of the mat and his death. Okay. Let you all know what a seizure mat is. It's sensors that get put under a mattress and they can tell if the person's moving around a lot, like if they were having a seizure or if they leave the bed completely. And the reason you'd put sensors on something is to sense these things to then notify someone else. So unbelievable that they said there's no link. You denied a mat that would have notified people that he's having a seizure in his bed. That's where he died. Are you fucking serious? You monsters. That's disgusting. That's disgusting. I'm glad I found this article. I found this last minute and I'm very glad I included it. Alright, something else in this article I want to quickly address. How Linda says that because the number of high functional people on the NDIS has gone down and the number of low functional people has increased. She actually fucking said that the NDIS is it possibly making people less functional? Are you fucking serious? Oh, give me strength. And of course that they're going to go through with these independent assessments one way or another. You've already signed the fucking contracts, haven't you? Okay, on to the next article. Utterly unconscionable, NDIS agency looks to reduce costs by increasing participant exits. Exclusive internal documents obtained by The Guardian show secretive task force also aims to slow spending via targeted review of participant plans. And this is from the 15th of May 2021. The agency that runs the National Disability Insurance Scheme is seeking to increase the numbers of people that exit the scheme and reduce overall spending on funding packages through a targeted review of existing participants' plans, internal documents show. Leaked documents last month revealed the agency had set up a Sustainability Action Task Force, SAT, with the aim of slowing spending on participant plans and growth in participant numbers. The National Disability Insurance Agency has refused to discuss the actions of the task force, which Labor and the Greens have dubbed a razor gang. But new documents obtained by Guardian Australia under Freedom of Information laws provide further insight into its aims. The previously reported internal talking points labelled strictly not for external distribution stated the task force 3 aims were to slow net growth in participant numbers, slow growth in spending per participant, and strengthen operational discipline. The new documents, however, reveal the attempt to slow the growth in participant numbers will come in part from a focus on an increase in participant exits. Further, slowing spending on participants' funding packages will be achieved in part by a targeted review of existing participant plans, the document states. Other objectives include a focus on tighter planning principles, tighter policy on specific reasonable and necessary supports, tighter price controls, and an increased enforcement in assurance policies. The unit's aims relate to internal decisions made by the agency's planners and are separate to a wider overhaul scheme through the controversial introduction of independent assessments or a rewriting of the NDIS Act that determines in law what can be funded and who can receive support. It comes as the government faces backlash from the disability community over its warning the scheme was increasingly unsustainable. Tuesday's budget papers showed spending on the scheme would hit $28.1 billion next financial year, up from a projected $25.4 billion forecast for 2021-22 in last October's budget. Costs are tipped to hit $33.3 billion in 2024-25, an increase from projections in a 2017 Productivity Commission report that estimated the figure would reach $30.6 billion by then. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds have used these forecasts to claim a need for hard decisions about the sustainability of the current funding model. Labor's NDIS spokesman Bill Shorten said the new documents were proof positive the Morrison government has no plan for Australians with disabilities except for .. It is utterly unconscionable that vulnerable people are trying in good faith to get on the NDIS completely unaware there is a secret plan to not let them in, he said. Senator Jordan John Steele, the Greens disability spokesman, said it was proof what disabled people have been saying was true. The goal of the so-called Sustainability Action Task Force was to stop disabled people from getting on and kicking off people who already are on our NDIS, he said. He said it suggested the government had deployed a team of people to march around the agency and identify people to be kicked off the plan that they have. This is a razor gang sweeping through the 430,000 people that rely on access to the NDIS to live a good life, Steele John said. The document shows the task force have been asked to deliver monthly improvement packages from April 2021 through to August 2021. One of the scheme's action has been to create a document of several scheme principles that planners and frontline staff should consider when creating a plan. However, there is still significant doubt about the task force broader remit. Asked at Senate estimates this month what the task force would be doing, the NDIA chief executive Martin Hoffman declined to directly answer. He emphasized the unit was merely part of an ongoing management activity. Hoffman said the task force target were only to ensure the scheme operated in accordance with the portfolio budget statements. He also would not say when the task force was established except to say he had asked one of my general managers to go offline and work on this. An organizational chart also released under Freedom of Information suggests the task force has 5 full-time staff and 8 part-timers. An NDIA spokesperson did not respond to question about the SAT's aims or activities, including whether the targeted review of exiting participants' plans described a plan targeted to particular participants for review in order to reduce their funding. All activities of the agency, including those of the SAT, are concise with and authorized under the NDIS Act, including the responsibilities for the scheme's sustainability and operating in line with the agreed funding from all governments, the spokesperson said. So this is just to go to show that they really are just going to gut the NDIS. They are willing to spend money on preventing people from being able to access the NDIS. They will put together task force to kick people off the NDIS. These people get a kick out of being cruel. Alright, I got two more I want to show you. Girl who uses wheelchair deemed to have no mobility concerns by NDIS independent assessment. 9-year-old Eliza Tate took part in a trial of the controversial disability assessment scheme that has left her family worried. And this is from the 17th of May 2021. A 9-year-old girl who sometimes uses a wheelchair was described as not having mobility concerns in a report prepared for the National Disability Insurance Scheme trial of the independent assessments. As debate continues about the controversial proposal, Sue Tape, whose 9-year-old daughter, Eliza, took part in an ongoing trial of the assessments in January, told Guardian Australia the family had agreed to be involved out of curiosity, but they were unsatisfied with the process. The changes were initially framed by the government about making the NDIS fairer, but have since been recast as a sustainability reform. Amid an intensifying debate about a claimed cost blowout, which is questioned by advocates. The plan to have independent assessments carried out by government-contracted allied health professionals would replace the current system where people provide reports obtained from their treating specialists. Tate said Eliza, who lives with physical and intellectual disabilities, had taken part in a trial assessment in January. The family then waited 16 weeks for a copy of the report. It said she doesn't have any mobility issues, Tate said. And this is a child with brittle bones who uses a wheelchair. I'm not quite sure how they arrived at that conclusion. The 5-page participant interaction notes included a question: does the participant have any concerns with mobility? The listed response is no. The response was baffling to Tate given the previous question. Eliza notes used a manual wheelchair, while other reports generated from the assessments also referred to Eliza's mobility issues. Tate said she was only aware of the inconsistency because she had specifically requested to see the report. She was worried that it could have affected her daughter's funding if the assessment were not a trial. I would imagine if I'm asking for a new wheelchair for Eliza because she grows out of her current one, they're going to look at the independent assessment and say she doesn't have mobility issues, Tate said. Tate said it was unclear whether the assessor had made a data error or what the finding was drawn from. A National Disability Insurance Agency spokesperson said the agency had apologized to Tate for the delay, but the spokesperson insisted a person's mobility or functional capacity would not be determined through one question alone. The use of a wheelchair and other mobility concerns are captured in the assessment in multiple places, the spokesperson said. Independent assessments will also be subjected to quality check. It comes as a survey of children and young people with disabilities Australia, CIDA, found overwhelming opposition to the independent assessments plans dubbed robo-planning by critics. A report for CIDA prepared by academics from 2 universities sought views from over 200 families, finding significant positives but also some dissatisfaction with the scheme. This included about 40% not being satisfied with their services and support, and more than 2/3 saying they had trouble accessing suitable services and support in their area. Young people with disabilities and their families were also asked about the government's controversial plan to introduce independent assessments. According to the CIDA report, of the 3/4 of respondents who were aware of the assessment proposal, 80% had a negative view compared to 6 who had viewed it positively. Of those with a negative view, many were worried that an assessment of this type done by a stranger would not give an accurate picture of abilities for a range of reasons such as lack of trust, complex needs, and masking behaviours, the report said. The NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds has said she will use the outcome of the trial to inform possible changes to the policy, but that independent assessments would go ahead in some form. Critics of the trial claim it is flawed in part because people are asked to give feedback without being informed what the impact could be expected to have on their funding package. The National Disability Insurance Scheme Chief Executive Martin Hoffman told a parliamentary inquiry this month nearly 3,000 people had taken part in the most recent assessment trial. He said to date more than 70% of people had reported a good to excellent experience overall, while 85% were positive about the questions and activities undertaken during the assessment. Of course, we seek to improve it. That's part of the reason we're doing the pilot, he said. But the dismissal of it, even the pilot so far, is not reasonable, I think, given the sort of data we are seeing. Positives identified by the CIDA report included many respondents describing the support they receive as life-changing. Mary Sayers, the CIDA chief executive, said the report showed that while the NDIS was transformational when it worked well, there were ongoing issues that would not be addressed by the independent assessment plans. Okay, a couple of comments on this one. Good on Sue, the mother, for requesting the report. And how the agency just apologises for the delay. Yeah, and about that delay, if there was a 16-week delay for just the trials, I could only imagine what sort of delay would come with the actual assessments if they're rolled out, and how the answer to the question, does the participant have any concerns with mobility? The answer to that being no. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not a bug, that's the feature. That's what they're gunning for. Anything that will make it seem like they can get away with giving someone less funding is the aim of the game. And besides that, how they're doing this independent assessment, which is supposedly going to be for people to get onto the NDIS, the testing people already on the NDIS. Why? Oh, well, it does say that they want to do it to everyone on the system, which is just a big indicator to me that, yeah, they want to kick people off. Or why would you assess people that are already on it? Which then leads me to my concerns of how would you go about it with someone like my brother? My brother's non-verbal. He's not going to give you any time of day for a questionnaire because he can't respond to you. Am I going to have to go do it for him? Am I going to have to sit him? Is he going to have to come? Because he's not going to enjoy that. Yeah. It will not do anyone any benefit, especially not him, to sit in an unfamiliar place for 3 hours for someone else to answer questions on his behalf. Yeah, and then you're just taking time out of anyone else's day, so then you are costing money. And yeah, I've been listening to people and talking to people, and they probably could have gotten further with their argument of trying to save people money with the specialist reports and all that than the whole making it fairer. Anyways, one more article. Okay, last article. Linda Reynolds says NDIS is too reliant on natural empathy of public servants. Minister rejects claims the disability community is united in its opposition to the introduction of independent assessments. And this is from the 18th of May 2021. Linda Reynolds has argued the National Disability Insurance Scheme is too reliant on individual public servants' judgment and their natural empathy as she defended the government's controversial proposal to introduce independent assessments. Fronting a parliamentary committee on Tuesday, the NDIS minister repeated her claim that the scheme was on an unsustainable growth trajectory, but acknowledged some disability groups were very angry and felt left out of the government's decisions to overhaul the scheme. She confirmed the government would bring forth legislation this year to implement the policy, though its design would be informed by an ongoing trial and Reynolds' extensive consultation with disability groups. Reynolds also said the government still intended to pursue a redefinition of the reasonable and necessary legal test for funding as part of an overhaul of the NDIS Act, which will likely eliminate some supports. She said confusion over the meaning of reasonable and necessary meant planning staff were unable to make decisions accurately, consistently and fairly in a timely manner. We're relying, I think, too much on individual public servants' judgment and their natural empathy, she said. The National Disability Insurance Agency has said it believes people's treating specialists may be affected by empathy bias, though it has not previously suggested, as Reynolds did on Tuesday, that the same concept applies to public servants creating plans in the scheme. The government has proposed independent assessments carried out by contracted allied health companies to replace the evidence provided by a person's treating specialist because it says the current process is inconsistent. However, disability advocates believe the reform is aimed at cost-cutting, a fear heightened by the government's increasing rhetoric about scheme sustainability, as well as leaked documents recently reported by Guardian Australia. Asked by the Labor MP Alicia Payne about the fact the disability community was completely united in opposition to the policy, Reynolds said the sector itself is not always homogeneous. There are always concerns about how we are implementing it or how the trial has been conducted and communicated, she said. We've had some fantastic suggestions from the disability community already on how we can improve that process, so I completely, utterly reject your assertion. Payne said she was reflecting the overwhelmingly negative view of the policy from disability groups who have provided submissions to the NDIS Joint Standing Committee examining the proposal. The committee heard under the government's proposal participants and applicants would undertake a series of questionnaires, known as assessment tools, and perform a task for an allied health professional who will use the data to allocate various scores to the person according to their functionality. Hoffman said those scores would then be used to determine a plan budget, subject to a planning meeting. The committee heard that a person's score would be fed into one of 400 reference groups that considered disability type, age, and other factors, and this could then decide what a typical flexible plan budget should be. Critics of the proposal, such as Bruce Boney-Hattie, the NDIA's inaugural chair and a former architect of the scheme, has labelled the process robo-planning. But a former Productivity Commissioner, John Walsh, another original architect of the scheme, told the committee on Tuesday he backed independent assessments. Walsh, who lives with high-level quadriplegia, said they were part of the initial design and should have been implemented much earlier in the scheme's rollout to ensure it was sustainable. The introduction of independent assessments will be difficult and a complicated undertaking, Walsh said. Far harder now than had it been implemented at the start of the scheme. But done well, it's a critical component of the recovery and success of the NDIS. The committee also heard that there were no guarantees assessors would have expertise in the disability of the person being assessed. Oliver Boldeck, the NDIA Deputy Chief Executive, said assessors would receive an extra 24 hours of training in the assessment tools and the NDIS Act, which would complement their tertiary degree. So a speech pathologist with 24 hours additional training will be sufficiently qualified to assess someone with cerebral palsy or with spine injury or a range of other disabilities, Committee Chair Kevin Andrews asked. Hoffman said no one was pretending people were going to a medical expert in the nature of the participant's case. We're talking about an assessment of functional capacity, he said. Reynolds and the NDIA Chief Executive Martin Hoffman were also quizzed about the case of 9-year-old Eliza Tate, whose trial independent assessment stated she had no mobility concerns. This was despite the fact she uses a wheelchair, which was noted in other parts of her assessment. Hoffman said there was a learning on one particular question and how that should be used. Ross Joyce, Chief Executive of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, told the committee trust is now broken between the disability community and the NDIA. Damien Griffiths, Chief Executive of First Peoples Disability Network, told the inquiry the agency had made little effort to ensure the assessments would be culturally appropriate for people from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background. Under questioning from Green Senator Jordan Steele-John, Hoffman also confirmed that a marketing contract with Hall and Partners to help the agency spur its reforms cost $84,000. Here's just a theory I have. The way Linda Reynolds handled everything with Brittany Higgins, and after Linda proved how much of a disgrace she is, that's how she proved to Morrison that she is the person for the job for this NDIS gutting. Linda could not give a fuck about anybody. It's a bit stunning. Like, it frightens me to think of what motivates people like that. Okay, time to talk about this final article. Alright, I just want to say great job to Green Senator Jordan Steele John. You know, everything he does, fantastic work. And how he got out of Martin Hoffman that they spent $84,000 on a marketing firm to try and sell their policies because they're just that bad. Like, it's laughable when they use the argument of trying to save money when they just blow money on all this other bullshit. Which leads me to the assessments and how they're going to replace getting reports from treating specialists. And we've gone through how all of this is for them to throw people off and them to be the crooks. Let's just turn it around for a second and just think of what if we, the people, have crooks among us. What I'm trying to say is it seems like it would be a bit easier to fake it when it comes to one of these independent assessments rather than going to get specialists to write reports to confirm you have a particular disability or whatever. But if you just have like a physiotherapist with an extra 24 hours of training, if it's just a matter of giving the right answers to the questions, people will get on the NDIS that don't need to be on the NDIS with this system, I reckon. I don't know if anyone else has put this out there, but I'm going to say it. Yeah, they already have people rorting the system as like fake providers, and then they're going to have fake participants. Such a shit show. Alright, I've got some TikToks for you, and then my final thoughts on everything at the end of this. And thank you for sticking through this whole thing with me. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Costs are going up. Linda Reynolds warns of hard discussion on NDIS funding. The very end of this article, Reynolds said she would also need to investigate why people who came into the scheme in 2017 now had packages that were, on average, 50% more than at the time of their arrival. I've asked the question, I don't know what the answer is. What it suggests is either the scheme is failing, or when they are coming up for their reassessment for some reason, they were either genuinely decreasing in functionality or are being over or under assessed. I don't know the answer to that. This woman's in charge of the NDIS. And she thinks that if the funding requirements for an individual goes up, that means that their situation, their condition is worsening. No, Linda. And don't get me wrong, there are people rorting the system, but here's a hypothetical child on the NDIS, right? And they need equipment. As they grow, they outgrow their equipment, keeping it vague, and then they need replacements, which are bigger and cost more, Linda. I'm going to need to get my pitchfork. I was reading this. And as it would, this just pissed me off by itself. Costs are going up. Linda Reynolds warns of hard discussion on NDIS funding. I get about halfway through and I read a bit where it says that this independent assessment bullshit will save the budget like $700 million. And around about then was when my phone gave me a notification of another article. This one. So they'll save $700 million by screwing over people on the NDIS. Same government, Morrison government, to spend $600 million on a gas-fired power plant in New South Wales Hunter region. I fucking hate these people. I fucking hate them so much. If only people with disabilities had the same sort of lobbyists as the fucking gas industry and shit. Oh, the perfect comment, because this is what I actually wanted to show everybody. Girl who uses wheelchair deemed to have no mobility concerns by NDIS independent assessment. That's the independent assessment we were just talking about, the one that's going to save all that money. See? Does the participant have any concerns with mobility? And the list of responses, no. If this isn't the only what the fuck I have to show you. So other than the system working that well that they want to introduce, and this is from May the 17th, May the 18th, Linda Reynolds says NDIS is too reliant on natural empathy of public servants. I fucking hate this government. You're too reliant on people with empathy and people that can see that if you need a wheelchair, that you need a wheelchair. We're too reliant on those people. So Linda Reynolds wants to get rid of that empathy, that natural empathy, and replace it with this winning system. All just to cut costs. Thank you. Yes, that's why I love you guys. You've got it down pat in the comments section. Perfect. Nancy, you know this. I know this. Two people just hanging out, wasting time on this app know this. Then why the fuck doesn't the minister that's in charge fucking know? And then they have the nerve to be like, oh, we're going to cut costs by targeting people with disabilities. Because, that's what they like to do. Target the most vulnerable in the community. Fucking. But we won't address any of the actual issues. We won't actually do anything about the legitimate problems. They'll do independent assessments. They'll just try to find ways to kick people off. They'll try to find ways to screw over people that the scheme's meant to help. And never address the people that are making profits that are actually the reason for costs being so high. It's like maybe, just maybe some oversight on this sort of stuff could have prevented what happened to Anne-Marie Smith. And that happening again. Alright, and just as a quick little summary, I'll probably upload just this by itself. So, the NDIS is being gutted. It started a while ago, but since Linda Reynolds has come in, they've really kicked it into overdrive. For example, NDIS cost-cutting task force told to reduce growth in participants and spending. Opposition for the reforms includes a united disability sector, Labour, the Greens, past NDIS executives, and several state governments. And not only do they want to do this to people applying for the NDIS, but they also want to do it to the 440,000 people already on the NDIS. And when the messaging went from, nah, this isn't about cost cutting, to, oh, yeah, it's obviously about cost cutting, we're spending way too much money, to then also then just blow $84,000 on research marketing. Linda Reynolds is sticking to her guns, and she's saying that these independent assessments are gonna go ahead one way or another. And it's not even entirely because they reckon they could save $700 million. The real important fact here is the fact that they've already signed $339 million worth of contracts with people that are going to do the assessments. It's not so much about saving money, it's about where they direct the money, whose pockets the money goes into. That's what this government does. Oh, and they're going to change what reasonable and necessary means in the NDIS Act, because apparently that's been causing confusion. I don't even know what they need to redefine with reasonable and necessary if they've already have it so they can fucking say that a seizure mat is not reasonable and necessary, and you have 23-year-olds fucking dying. And I think she's already said it all with the fact that she said that the NDIS is too reliant on the natural empathy of public servants. So this woman's approach when it comes to dealing with Australians with disabilities is she thinks there's a bit too much empathy involved. That really says it all. Alright, this brings us to the end. Final thing I want to say is I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the hard work and great journalism by Luke Henriquez Gomez. Fantastic. I can't think of anyone who's following what's going on with the NDIS like Luke is, so he's a gem. Thanks for watching, and if you want to do something productive, email Linda Reynolds and tell her you know what she's up to with the NDIS.